Okay. Deindustrialization is a process of social and economic change caused by the removal or reduction of industrial capacity or activity in a country or a region, especially of heavy industry or manufacturing industry. The term deindustrialization has been used extensively after the recent outbreak of the war in Ukraine, which means after February 2022, because analysts argue that the United States is not only fighting Russia through its proxies in Ukraine, but also plotting against Germany to deindustrialize the country and hence subjugate the strongest economy in Europe, which needs Russian gas to run its industrial sector. In a book published in 1945 titled Germany is Our Problem by Henry Morgenthau, America's Treasury Secretary, he presented a proposal to strip post-war Germany of its industry and turn it into an agricultural economy. Although this radical proposal was never implemented, the Ukraine war brought the American plan again to the table. Now, this is the cover of the book. I just want to mention a few facts about this book. Germany is Our Problem is a book written in 1945 by Henry Morgenthau, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. In the book, he describes and promotes a plan named after him for the occupation of Germany after World War II. During 1944, Henry Morgenthau involved himself in U.S. foreign policy. Together with his associate Harry White, he formulated the Morgenthau Plan. For the sake of permanently eliminating German war potential, the plan advocated, amongst other things, German territorial dismemberment, partitioning, and deindustrialization. The plan was agreed upon by Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt at the Second Quebec Conference. Leaks to the press about the plan led to Roosevelt denying the existence of the plan. Nevertheless, the plan strongly influenced early U.S. occupation policy and through the Potsdam Agreement also early Allied occupation policy. This is in short about the plan. Now, the thing is here that the industrialization of Germany will have harsh repercussions not only on the European regional level, but also on the domestic German level. Again, my printer decided to make some noises. Anyways, so I wanted to dig in a little bit in this regard, and I found a recent article published by Anatol Lieven, and the title of the article goes, Why Germany's Pursuit of Peace in Ukraine is Paralyzed. So I made some notes, so let's go through these notes and read and see why Germany is incapable of promoting peace now in Ukraine, and at the same time, why how this industrialization process is happening at the moment in Germany. So the author argues that industry is critical not only to the German economy, but to national identity and the stability of its political system. After the catastrophic defeat and humiliation of the Second World War, the economic miracle of the 1950s, with its recreation of famous German industries, was central to the reestablishment of the nation's self-respect. The Christian Democratic Union, CDU, and the Social Democratic Party, SPD, share of the vote has already declined considerably over the past 2 decades, in part, as elsewhere in the West, because of a belief among former industrial classes that they have been abandoned by the political elites. Now, historically, the CDU and the SPD used to have the strongest share of the votes in Germany, especially by the industrial classes. But recently, in the past 2 decades, especially after the recent so-called environmental revolution and the environmental activists pushing towards more greener energy and trying to decrease the industrial capacity not only of Germany but also elsewhere in order to save us from a supposed catastrophe that is coming soon on the humanity, which will destroy the entire planet. So based on this, there is a shift in the policy towards the economy of Germany and elsewhere. So the business elite or the industrial elite in Germany, they feel, so maybe some of them feel that they have been betrayed by the political elite. And therefore, here the author argues if Germany were to undergo the kind of rapid and radical deindustrialization experienced by Britain in the early 1980s, it seems likely that Germany would see a surge of support for extremist parties, for example, on the right, Alternative for Germany, AfD, and on the other end of the spectrum, Die Linke. And at the moment, if you follow the German political scene or the speeches in the German federal parliament, the Bundestag, you will see that both parties, or from the AfD and from the Linke, main, I would say, figures from them, they are arguing that there is a plot to deindustrialize Germany, and they are harshly criticizing the German government policies towards Russia and the sanctions policies because it is harming the German economy. So there is a shift also in the mood of the people in Germany, and we can see the increase of the popularity, for example, of the AfD. And the Ukraine war, in my opinion, has helped the AfD more than it helped, more than the Corona policies or the Corona era itself. So at the moment, these two parties are gaining more votes, and the statistics showing that their shares of the votes or the support is increasing. And this is happening on the expense of the CDU and the SPD, and probably also the Greens, because the Greens are the warhead of the industrialization policy in Germany. And we will come to that later because the author already also mentions that. So if this shift is happening towards extreme link or the extreme right, this incidentally would mean a crippling blow to the ideological foundations of American global leadership. Faced with this rather obvious danger, quite apart from the apocalyptic threat of nuclear war, it seems probable that previous German governments would have been doing their utmost to restore Russian gas supplies by bringing about a peace settlement or at least a ceasefire in Ukraine, mediating between Washington, Moscow, and Kiev, and putting forward Germany's own proposal. So Germany knew the danger if there is a war in Ukraine and what the repercussions would be on its own economy and the industry. So they were doing their utmost efforts to mediate between these sides. However, since the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine first emerged almost a year ago, there has been no serious autonomous German effort either to prevent the war or to bring it to an end. The German public is uneasy about the economic consequences of the war, but the German media, think tanks, and most of the political establishment seems completely committed to the US and NATO line that peace talks are entirely a matter for Ukraine. Without German leadership, there is no possibility whatsoever of any European Union initiative for peace. The French will not act alone, and the smaller countries are incapable of doing so. During a recent visit to Berlin, I met a few independent thinkers or think tankers who supported the idea of a German peace initiative. However, I met nobody who thought that it could actually happen at the present. So why is that? What explains this change in Germany, and could the German approach change again? So the author says, beside the Russian offensive on Ukraine, part of the explanation for the paralysis of Germany's ability to act in pursuit of peace is that a narrative has taken hold and been accepted by most of the establishment, whereby previous German governments should be ashamed of their attempts to promote good relations with Moscow, and in particular of the way that they made the country dependent on Russian gas. Therefore, there is an established narrative believed by the German establishment or the ruling parties, and also the think tankers, the intellectuals, the journalists. So this class that can influence the public opinion, they believe in a narrative that the previous government should be ashamed of themselves for having good relations with Russia. And this is coming especially after the war in Ukraine and the American attempt to collect all its allies under one umbrella. And there is no a possibility of any of these allies to become neutral or try to play a mediator role, for example. So everybody should stick with the line, with the narrative, and this is extremely it is affecting the negatively Germany's capability overall to play a mediator role between the United States, Kiev, and Russia. So this narrative has been assiduously promoted by Washington, by Poles, and other East Europeans, and by the German Greens. So you remember I mentioned the Greens previously and how they are influencing this policy and promoting for the deindustrialization of Germany. So this narrative is also pushed by the Greens themselves, who were not in the government when these decisions were made and find this accusation a convenient stick with which to beat the other parties. Now, leading experts and former officials, including Helmut Schmidt in Germany, warned that NATO expansion was likely to lead to war. The German government, like other European governments, however, told its people that NATO expansion was essentially risk free because if they had addressed these risks and proposed in consequence a radical reduction in Russian gas supplies with resulting steep rises in energy prices, a majority of Germans would most probably have turned decisively against NATO expansion. So the people in Germany weren't told that the expansion of NATO to east poses a security threat to Russia, and Russia would act accordingly. And they also didn't tell their people that if the gas supplies decrease to Germany, the prices of the gas and other products will also increase. If they were told about these facts, the Germans would most probably have turned decisively against the NATO expansion. Thus, after the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, which followed closely on NATO declaration of a commitment eventually to admit Georgia and Ukraine, I asked a former member of the NATO Secretary General's staff whether NATO had had any contingency plan to defend Georgia in the event of war. He told me that not merely was there no plan, but also that no plan had even been discussed. So when the author expressed incredulity, he explained that since Western publics had been assured that the expansion of NATO involved no risk of war, any official at NATO headquarters who suggested that it did would have been branded as an opponent of enlargement and their careers would have suffered accordingly. So this is a very important point. There are definitely people who enjoy sanity and they understand the geopolitics of Europe and the geopolitics of Russia and global geopolitics in general. And they understand the expansion of NATO to the east will trigger a Russian response, aggressive Russian response militarily, economically, and etc. However, they are afraid to speak up. And this is a very major point because the accusations against collective West that they are all somehow imperialists or they somehow all on the side of the United States or embedded with Washington's foreign policy is relatively untrue because there are people who know the risks, but they can't speak up because their careers will suffer. And this is the issue of the democratic systems in the West in general. You are allowed to say what you want to say, but there will be repercussions for that. And the biggest repercussion is on your career. And most people prefer to keep their jobs and feed their families instead of being jobless and go cashless or bankrupt. Aware of the danger of war in Ukraine, but afraid either to demand sacrifices and an acceptance of risk from German voters or to defy Washington and split Europe by standing firmly for compromise with Russia, a succession of German governments took the path of least resistance, which is continuing dependence on cheap and plentiful Russian gas, together with continual acquiescence to US policies that they had been warned were extremely likely to lead to conflict. The bitterly ironic result is that a combination of German policies founded firmly in political cowardice has now led Germany into the greatest danger it has faced since the catastrophe of World War II. I think this article is very important and it explains a lot about the current dilemma in Germany and also in the region in Europe and how Germany's hands are tied and they can't act to play like a mediator role between Russia and the United States and how the people who with sanity aren't able to speak because they will lose their jobs, and how the United States is pushing for not only a proxy war in Ukraine, but also the policy of the industrialization of Germany, which I think is one of the gravest dangers posed on Germany after World War II. When the war erupted in Ukraine, or in the February conflict, I would say, one of the first videos that I posted on Syriana analysis was about this issue, the industrialization of Germany. And some of my German friends who are like older than me and with, I would say, more expertise, or they know better their country, they disagreed with me. And one of them contacted me just a few days ago because back then I said Germany will be the biggest loser of this war in Western Europe because of the American policy in Ukraine. And back then it was inconvenient to believe that. And now, when the people start to feel the burden, the economic burden on their shoulders, and the bills are coming, right? And some of the industries are declaring bankruptcy, and the government is thinking of nationalizing some of the factories or some of the sectors. All these are a direct consequence, result of the American proxy war in Ukraine, that Russia is also involved heavily. And of course, I would never argue that Russia isn't trying to harm its opponents. Of course, this is an all out war now, in my opinion, even though it is still between proxies from the NATO side and the directly from the Russian side. Um, so Germany is squeezed between this and is paying a bigger price, and I think the people also are paying the highest price. So I'm not seeing, I cannot foresee a positive outcome from this war in Ukraine on the German domestic and foreign seas. But this is my opinion. What is your opinion about this issue? Do you believe in the American plot against Germany to deindustrialize the country? Do you believe there are internal forces in Germany pushing for the industrialization of Germany? And do you think this will happen? And if it happens, how would be the status of Germany on the European and the global level amidst this reformation of the international system? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. I've been your host, Georg Almasian of Syriana Analysis. If you're new, please consider subscribing and hit the like button. It's a great help. And also, if you want to support Syriana Analysis financially, there are so many means in the description below. Therefore, I'm very thankful and grateful for everyone who is supporting Syriana Analysis. Thanks to you, this is possible, and I'm able. And see you next time.